The Todas. London. Printed by Spottiswoode and Co. New Street Square and Parliament Street. That's an illustration. A phrenologist among the Todas, or a study of a primitive tribe in South India. History, character, customs, religion, infanticide, polyandry, language. By William E. Marshall, Lieutenant Colonel of Her Majesty's Bengal Staff Corps. Permanent illustrations by the autotype process. Shepherd. Mind, sir, that I was not saying that phrenology was false. On the contrary, I think there's a great deal of truth in what they say about the shape and size of the head. Noctus Ambrosianae. Phrenology has done good service by showing us, with more emphasis than had ever been done before, that human beings are widely different in their mental tastes and aptitudes. Professor A. Bain, The Study of Character. Learn what is true in order to do what is right. Professor T. H. Huxley. London. Longsman, Green and Co. 1873. All rights reserved. Preface. In the course of a furlough I took in the year 1870 to the Madras Sanatorium of Uttakamand in the Nilagiri Mountains, I heard much of an aboriginal race living in the neighborhood, which, infanticidal and polyandrous, was said to be fast dying out. I had long been curious to understand the mysterious process by which, as appears inevitable, savage tribes melt away when forced into prolonged contact with a superior civilization. But ignorant of all the languages of South India, I should have relinquished attempt to study the Todas had I not the great good fortune to make the acquaintance of the Reverend Friedrich Metz of the Basel Missionary Society, who had spent upwards of 20 years in labors amongst the primitive tribes forming the inhabitants of the Nilagiris, and who, in addition to being skilled in several Dravidian dialects, was exceptionally practiced in High Canaries and Tamil. Above all, he was the only European able to speak the obscure Toda tongue. Footnote 1. Commonly called Uttakaman in the Nilgiri Hills, it being the peculiar Anglo-Indian custom to style all mountains hills. Thus, the Himalayas are only hills, whilst in England, Ben Nevis and Snowdon are mountains. Mr. Mitz most readily agreed to cooperate with me in strict inquiry into the condition of the Todas and and brevity combined. Mr. Metz most readily agreed to cooperate with me in strict inquiry into the condition of the Todas, and henceforth became my sole associate in all expeditions amongst them, save one or two. It is the more proper and just that I should in this place render Mr. Metz the warmest acknowledgement of the very disinterested and important share he had in the undertaking, that there is so little in what I have written in these pages to recall his name. It was not only that his knowledge of Toda dialect was invaluable for minute and truthful investigation, but the personal respect in which he was held by the people and the confidence they placed in his fidelity to them obtained for us a more friendly welcome and complete exposure of minds than would have been accorded had we been mere strangers. I must state, however, that my friend is not even in the slightest degree responsible for any opinions I have expressed. A small vocabulary, compiled and carefully revised by Mr. Metz, will be found as the groundwork of the last chapter. It may be said more entirely to consist of actual Toda words than any other existing. Our operations began with a census of a portion of the tribe, combined with an examination of each of the families that came before us. But in proportion as our work advanced, so did interest in the subject develop until the scheme was entertained of enlarging the topic from its original design so as to embrace a study of the manners and customs of a primitive race of man. With this evolution grew also the desire so to describe what I had seen as to enable readers who could never have an opportunity of witnessing life amongst untutored races to realize justly and without exaggeration what it really is, and by analogy, what it must have been in the prehistoric era, long before Adam delved and Eve spun, before man had much developed in manly qualities. I have actually witnessed most of the scenes here described. Such of the remainder as are not otherwise authorized, I have compiled from direct narrative of the most reliable Todas, while hoping, though not without some misgivings, that the ugly statistics collected with so much care and the speculations advanced to account physiologically for the origin of obscure customs may have some slight value even to the seventh. I am sanguine that the antique practices now brought to light and the illustrations I have attempted of everyday life may render the book acceptable to the general reader. I may say that great and especial pains have been taken to render as large a portion of the work as the subject permits attractive and suited for ladies' reading. A few words of explanation are perhaps called for to account for my having devoted an entire chapter to the description of some of the first principles of phrenology, a subject which is fully treated in standard works by acknowledged authorities. I wished primarily to show the premises forming the basis for many conjectures which otherwise would have borne too much the appearance of dogmatism or that might have been misunderstood. Secondly, I desired to show for phrenology a marked practical value for ethnological purposes, and no single work containing with clearness and brevity combined so much information calculated to be serviceable to enquirers disposed to pursue the phrenologic mode of enquiry into the nature of barbarous races, which I have here faintly attempted. I trusted that the chapter might be useful in some sort as a manual for ethnographers so circumstanced. But in this matter, as I indeed took throughout the book, I must trust very much to the lenient judgment of my readers if, as a solitary Indian, far away from contact with men of science, but fresh from the actual and impressive presence of nature's children, in attempting to work out for myself some of the vastly interesting unsolved problems of our day, I air some seemingly quaint ideas. The public is concerned simply in their truth. The publication of these results of investigations made 2 years ago has been delayed through the impossibility of finding in a very hot climate and in the intervals of official duties, leisure sufficient for completing a subject demanding much thought and care. I beg to invite a special attention to the important contributions made by the eminent philologist and great Tamil scholar, the Reverend G.U. Pope, D.D., at present headmaster of the Bishop Cotton School at Bangalore. These will be found both in the form of footnotes throughout this little work and forming a distinct chapter at the end. The interesting and often most valuable derivations of Toda was given in these notes have enabled me, in the absence of other evidence, to explain several customs and to work out some speculations that otherwise seemed quite incomprehensible. But for the linguist, I trust chapter 29 will have special attractions. To the Honorable Sir A. Arbuthnot, CS, KCSI, Secretary to the Government of Madras, I am greatly indebted for having placed at my disposal the records existing in the Revenue Department on the subject of Toda infanticide. I am beholden to the skill of the distinguished artists, Messrs. Bone and Shepherd of Simla, and to Messrs. Nicholas and Curtis of Madras for the photographs which decorate the book. These have been printed in carbon by the Autotype Fine Art Company, 36 Rathbone Place, London. W. E. Marshall, Faizabad, 2nd October 1872. Contents will skip. A Phrenologist among the Todas, Chapter 1, Historical Outline. Meaning of the name Toda, names of clans, Kols, the aborigines of India. Todas are Dravidians. Dravidians penetrate India and dispossess the Kol race. Affinities of the Dravidians. Aryan conquest. Its effects on the Kol and Dravidian races. The mutual influence of the Kol, Dravidian, and Aryan races on one another. Positions in India now held by the three races. Positions in the Deccan of the Dravidian tribes. Affinities of the Toda dialect. Last migrations of the Todas. Kains and cromlechs on the Nilagiris. Are the Kain builders allied to Todas? The people whose ancient customs and primitive habits form the topic of these pages are called by the English Todas, but in their own language, an individual of the tribe is Todan, the plural being Todaru. Todan, Tamil, Thoravam, and Thoram, a herd, and thus Thoravan or Thoran is equivalent to herdsman according to Pope. On this note, Mr. Metz remarks, as the D in Toda is not a lingual da but dental, I do not believe the word means herdsman as Toda in Old Tamil. I do not know the meaning of Toda with the dental D. The Badagas, of whom more hereafter, who for centuries past have lived in close proximity to the Todas, style them in the singular Todavanu and in the plural Todavaru, from which by abbreviation Todavan or Todavar. Hence also have arisen other corruptions in English as Thoravar, Tautavas, Todas, Todis, and etc. Dr. Hunter gives in his dictionary a Todua variety of the Todu language, which is an error. The Toda tribe is divided into 5 clans called Peiki, Pekkan, Thodi, Kuttan, and Kenna. The two first are very closely related, although they do not now intermarry. The former have become what might be termed a Levitical clan. All of the remaining four freely marry amongst one another. We have very little positive information of the earliest inhabitants of India, but so far as the existing condition of evidence enables us to determine, they were of a race whose speech, having analogies to the extensive Ho or Kol group of languages, derived from a source common both to themselves and the Chinese, gives ground for the belief that at some extremely early prehistoric period, a migration of barbarians into India took place from over its northeastern confines, from the northern shores of the Indian Ocean and the Chinese Sea, thus seemingly earning for themselves the title of children of the soil, the aboriginal inhabitants of at least the central and northeastern tracts of India. The physical type of this race, judging from the many distinct tribes of the family still to be found in various hill ranges, partook of the main features of the Mongol. In the hairless face, broad and short, the spreading unshapely nose, small eyes, and high cheekbones. And evidences of the people exist even in the southern portion of the Indian peninsula, both in the presence of this peculiar stamp of countenance and apparently in the names of places and of natural features of the country. The Toda tongue is entirely apart from that of the Kol family. It is indeed now known with absolute certainty to be a dialect of the development of Turanian speech styled Dravidian, the language of a group of primitive, illiterate, and perhaps warlike tribes who, between 3000 and 4000 years ago, migrated from tracts of Western Asia and penetrating India, probably through Baluchistan and the natural water lines of the country, filled all its southern and western and southern districts, pushing before them in some period of their advance the various tribes of the Kol aborigines, some of whom in slavery or menial conditions of life survived as subjects of their conquerors. The Reverend Dr. Caldwell has drawn attention to the remarkable circumstance that the closest and most distinct affinities to the speech of this race are those which have been discovered in the languages of the Finns and Lapps of northern Europe and of the Ostyaks and other Ugrians of Siberia, and consequently that the Dravidian is proved by language alone in the silence of history, in the absence of all ordinary probabilities, to be allied to tribes that appear to have overspread Europe before the arrival of the Goths and the Pelasgi, and even before the arrival of the Celts. The characteristics of the Toda branch of this race form the burden of the following pages. In the process of writing of them, I have grown to the very strong conviction that the people are a surviving sample of some portion of the Turanian race when in its very primitive stage. Without much exercise of the imagination, I can picture them the contemporaries and neighbors, even perhaps the ancestors of races of southwestern Asia which have made a figure in early history. There is much of the blameless Ethiopian about them, something of the Jew and of the Chaldean in their appearance. I do not venture to hazard an opinion as to their cradle land. It is safer to draw attention to what, judging by appearances and customs, are their possible ethnic affinities. At a period which historians have placed 300 or 400 years subsequent to this Turanian inroad, a branch of the Aryans, an Indo European race of the Caucasian mold, speaking Sanskrit, burst in on India from the northwest. At first occupying that part of the country now known as the Punjab, these warlike colonists grew in the course of centuries into a conquering power, establishing empires on the Indus and Ganges after the fashion of lawless times on the ruins of the coal aborigines and Dravidians, holding possession of the soil of various parts, and with a success so complete that we find the Aryas ultimately occupying the whole of the arable tracts, which in the main follow the course of those rivers and form the northern base of the Indian peninsula. As a consequence of this crushing conquest in the northwest, we recognize Dravidian tribes in the inferior strata of the resident populace and their blood mixed with that of even the highest Aryan castes. The Sikh bears a considerable though refined likeness to the Toda, and the province of Oudh has manifestly a large Dravidian substratum. Warlike and gifted though this branch of the Indo European family has shown itself to have been, it does not appear to have subjugated those Dravidians which colonized the Deccan, but rather obtained sacerdotal influence amongst them through the means of a superior religious culture and civilization, of which ambitious and wily pundits, like monks in the barbarous days of Europe, were the exponents and pioneers. As might be expected, the three main races of India could not be located in the close contiguity which resulted of repeated conquest and subsequent expanding numbers before their various religious customs, their languages, and even their blood began to show their influence in reaction on one another. Perhaps the most striking effect of all these operations was that which the barbarous rites and beliefs of the inferior races exercised on the purer and more spiritual religious faith which originally distinguished the Aryas. In their desire to absorb all the subject and utterly savage tribes of the conquered inhabitants, the Brahmins opened the portals of their religion and incorporated the many gods of the aborigines with the ancient deities of their Vedic pantheon. The pure Hindu religion, although thus actually debased in the process, probably became an instrument of even greater efficiency when wielded by clever priests for the purpose of obtaining an ascendancy over races in an extremely low stage of culture. And we recognize this truth in the great influence which Hinduism and the Sanskrit tongue have obtained over the entire Indian continent. In the case of the Dravidians, it seems to me, on reviewing Toda religious practice, an extremely probable event that a possible early contact with the Aryas long before either race entered India rendered Sanskrit, especially in regard to all pious notions and reverent observance, influential amongst them even then. This is a very interesting consideration, one which must render it difficult to determine at what early period this Dravidian branch of the Turanian tree had first been biased through the superior religious instinct of the Arya. If we consider that the many tribes of these three dominant races brought into India the various habits, religious observances, and dialects of the diverse tracts of Asia whence they emigrated. When we further reflect on the different results which must have ensued during their residence in the country of their adoption, from the contiguity of certain of them to the progressive Brahmanical race, with its refined and copious vocabulary, its elevated moral code, with idealized pantheon of heroes and heroines, and the proximity of others to the carnivorous coal, his tutelary deities, and bloody rites. Further, bearing in mind the isolation of tribes kept asunder by the lawlessness of the times, the pathless nature of the country, and the conservative nature of tribal barbarians, we can readily comprehend why Dravidian tribes have now concreted into separate nationalities whose dialects are distinct though affiliated languages and whose religion varies in every shade from the simple but senseless or perhaps cruel observances introduced by original immigrants to the complex rites of corrupted Hinduism. The accompanying sketch map of the Indian peninsula describes the position in the country which the Dravidians hold at the present day, when, after their wanderings and their wars, the various tribes of which the race is composed had settled down, then expanded into important nations, speaking distinct dialects of which the following are now highly cultivated. Number 1 Tamil, number 2 Telugu, number 3 Canaries, number 4 Malayalam, number 5 Tuluva, 3 others Swiss, number 6 Toda, number 7 Gond, Number 8, Ku or Kong, remain in their pristine barbarous state, innocent even of written characters, and there are said to be several other minor dialects or corruptions belonging to small Sylvan families holding unimportant geographical positions in the Dravidian area. Remnants of the ejected coals are shown on the eastern limits, and Aryanized peoples are closed in on the entire northern boundary. The Reverend Dr. Pope, in his contribution to this book, gives it as his opinion that the Toda language was originally Old Canaries and not a distinct dialect. He thinks that the language has dwindled to a mere skeleton as a result of isolation and consequent degeneration of the people. The early Indian history of the Todas has been as completely lost as that of the long protracted period which preceded their migration to the Deccan. We know, indeed, with a tolerable degree of certainty, both from their own legends and from those of neighboring tribes, that until the last few hundred years, they inhabited a jungle tract of inferior hills situated between the Canaries and Tamilian districts in the direction of Hasanur, which on eastern longitude 77 degrees 20 minutes and north longitude 11 degrees 45 minutes form portion of the eastern Ghats, and that they then divided into two or more parts, of which one settled in a northerly direction near Kolegal, and the other migrated or was driven in the direction of the Nilagiri mountain. The greater number settling on its very topmost plateau, where we now find them, whilst a small remnant winding behind its northwestern slopes remained on one of the lower plateaus called the Wainad. This modern place of Toda residence is an isolated mountain upwards of 7,000 feet above sea level, upreared on eastern longitude 76 degrees 45 minutes and north latitude 11 degrees 20 minutes amidst the plains of South India, the gigantic and sudden culmination of the minor mountain chain system called the Eastern and Western Ghats, which there meet. These, their last movements, having been very small and of minor importance, I have included their past and their present places of residence in one area, marked 6 on the map. Not only the summit of the Nilagiris, but the tops of the minor rounded eminences thereon are studded with cairns, raised for the reception of ashes of the dead by a race whose history has been so completely lost that not a tradition even of it remains. On the same plateau are also a few cromlechs, also many deserted circles of stones situated near streams of running water. Some manifestly constructed for pounding cattle, others with equal certainty not made for that purpose, being in exposed situations and having rocky beds. These erections undoubtedly do not belong to the Todas, who not only do not regard them with reverence, but assert that they were of a people antecedent to themselves on the mountain. Moreover, they are found in many parts of the Indian peninsula and of Western India. But I may do service in drawing attention to points in which the cremation customs of this unknown race are those of the Todas, and to those in which they differ from them. In brief, we find from relics exhumed from cairns that their owners made use of the horse, that they practiced agriculture, holding the buffalo in high esteem and burying its bell with the manes of the deceased. We learned that they were acquainted with the use of the spear, bow, and arrow, that their women wore simple jewelry, and that their implements, weapons, and ornaments, whilst of a very primitive nature, were of designs extant not only in India but in this part of the country. We may safely deduce from the evidences of car manifest in the solidity of these stone receptacles, as well as from the positions in which we find them, both that these people held the memory of the dead in great respect, and their property alive to be their property when dead, and that their religious belief as regards the future state was connected by some line of thought with prominent natural features of the country. In many respects, viz. In the custom of cremation, the regard shown to buffaloes, the especial notice of its bell, the practice of burying weapons and personal ornaments, we shall find in due course almost an identity with the obsequies and modes of thought now displayed by the Todas. And Mr. Metz writes concerning the Toda faith. Their idea is that the spirits of deceased Todas, together with the souls of the buffaloes killed by their friends to accompany them to heaven and supply them with milk there, take a leap from Makruti peak as the nearest way to the celestial regions. The chief points of variance between the two peoples consist in the evidences in the cairn builders of a civilization implied in the practice of agriculture and in raising stone constructions to contain their dead, somewhat superior to that of the Todas. Regarding the matter of husbandry, the Todas could not be more backward in respect to these unknown cairn builders that they are behind all the tribes of Dravidians which at this very day surround and isolate them. A certain small degree only of civilization is of necessity implied in the presence of simple implements of cultivation. The evidence of stone cemeteries probably does not imply the exercise of so much labor as would at first appear. For what more likely, indeed almost certain, than that each village or family erected one once for all for itself and that it was filled in by degrees, but it would express a method of disposing of the ashes somewhat superior in completeness, refinement, and perhaps in depth of religious feeling to that practiced by the Todas, nothing more. No essential difference in race, but merely a tribal custom. I would advance, therefore, the great likelihood of these cairn builders having been members of certain Turanian tribes of a similar stage of culture to our early Dravidians, each of which would have brought with it the custom of the particular portion of Western Asia from which it migrated. This tribe apparently from a rocky and hilly region. It does not seem too much to insist that in grand migrations of primitive races, not merely families of one spirited tribe would move together, but they would be attended or followed at intervals of time by other tribes dependent on or patronized by them, not necessarily closely related, though perhaps near neighbors. All, however, moved by the same impetus. Continued pressure from without, a succession of famines at the door, or a vacuum to be filled up. Had the Todas died out 100 years ago, but little remembrance of them would survive at this day. Similarly, these defunct races live solely in their imperishable monuments. In chapter 19 on the both will be found the suggestion that that eccentric building may have belonged to the Cain builders. I do not wish to press the theory with undue vigor, yet if form is in a degree a sort of index or expression of the mind that adopts it, I think that in the unusual shape of roof pointing upwards in the both may lurk a mental impulse in coordination with that which prompted them to place cairns on top of hills. Some superior religious development of the tribe, the root, I may term it, of some such conception as leads us to the words, nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee. Certain it is that the Todas, who grovel to the earth, show in their cremation custom, as in the architecture of their most holy place, a parity in loveliness as much marked as this prominence of individuality which we note in the Cain builders. I have apparently stepped out of my way to speculate on the remains of an unknown people, but my object has been to show a possible connection between the Cain builders and the Todas. End of the chapter. Okay, the next chapter is phrenological basis. I think we should deal this in next video. Till then, actually, let me check. There is, I suspect a couple of pages are missing. I think pages 5 and 6 are missing in this. Let's see what is this page number. No, 6 is right.